now.
We're Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot. We're an excellent channel, so you should subscribe to us, like and comment on this video. You don't know what it is yet, but just comment.
Do it!
Nell, you did a video 3 months ago, 6 months ago, I don't know anymore.
Some amount of time ago.
Where we looked at how racist, sexist and homophobic your TBR was.
And we were a bit horrified.
We were. So, we've got some numbers here.
I took some photos. I split my bookshelf into him and her, white and people of colour, and straight and queer authors, and took some photos and sort of did a comparison of where the split was. And we did numbers. What's the numbers?
We did numbers. So, in case anybody is new and doesn't know, Nell, with all of her book hauls, has only been allowed to buy herself a person of colour or queer people until she buys 100 books.
Yeah, because of the results of this first set of photos, because they were just a bit mortifying.
If she stuffs up and gets a book for a book club or a buddy read or a subscription box or whatever,
yeah,
she has to buy 2 penalty books.
Yes.
Okay, so you've got 42 books to go? 42 books to go.
I've got 42 books to go. So we've just passed the halfway point in this little experiment, and I thought that it was a good time to take another batch of photos, which we'll, I guess, put up as part of this video. And to sort of do the numbers on how much the balance of my TBR has shifted while I've been not just being conscious, but like given myself a quota essentially.
So the first number I'll do, is you had. So this is sans what you've read in that time as well. So if you've read, they've come off.
Yes. And I have probably read more representatively as well. So
actually, these numbers don't add up.
I've not been so strategic. Why do you mean they don't add up?
Because previously you had 121 books on your TBR.
Yeah.
Now you've got 193 books on your TBR.
Yeah.
And you've hauled 58 books because 100 minus 42 is 58.
So what's the difference there?
Well, that means that if you haven't read a book, you should have 179. But actually, you've got another. I know what you. It'll
be because we moved that bookshelf and I found books, and it'll be non-purchase acquisitions of books. Things like you finishing books and it coming off your TBR and getting put on mine. Me realising I haven't read something in one of our bookshelves in another room and putting it on my TBR bookshelf.
So effectively, you've still hauled books.
I mean, I guess, but I really just see that as our disorganisation.
What you're really saying...
I haven't actually actively chosen most of these books. I think they were just on the wrong bookshelf when I did this set of photos, the first set of photos.
Well, the other thing that could have happened is that you could have had a book haul come in after you filmed, but before you started counting.
Oh, I definitely did.
Yeah,
I definitely did, because I remember deciding not to include it because it was so heavily...
The post here has been rubbish, and you would have had to wait sometimes over 3 months for a book. Yeah. Other times the book will get here like within 3 or 4 days. So
yeah, there's definitely at least one book haul that wasn't included.
Just the perks of COVID. So, but you let all of those books come in, and then you started to buy books essentially.
Yes.
So that's why the numbers don't match. Anyway, so in reality, we should have done the numbers again when we got those books in, but
we didn't.
But we didn't.
So we've got what we've got.
So, but anyway, let's see if you're on track. So I've converted them to percentages for you.
Yes, which is good.
So prior to
the project,
you had 121 books. Now you got 193. You had 59.5% men, 41.5% women.
Yep.
Okay. Now you've got 49.7% him, 49.7% her, 0.5%. I know that doesn't add up. They, them.
Yeah.
And that's just slightly wrong because of rounding.
Yeah.
But, so that's even.
Well.
Except for they them. But I do know in your last rap you read 2 intersexed authors.
Oh, not intersex, non-binary.
Non-binary authors, sorry.
Yes. I definitely think that my queer stats in particular would look a little bit better if I hadn't read all queer books since this started, basically.
Well, that's...
But that is what it is. The aim wasn't to be strategic. The aim was to fix the pool of books that I'm reading from.
So, let's compare white, Caucasian, whatever you want to call it, with people of colour.
Yes.
Right. So, this was very skewed beforehand, 84 to 16 beforehand.
I could not get over, I think that was the one that I was shocked that I didn't have more women than men on my TBR, to be honest, because I actually do really prefer female voices. But I had a few series in there, and there was a few reasons that sort of made sense as to why I wasn't in balance with boys and girls. And I clearly didn't think queer people existed, because I had no they them at all. But I was absolutely, when I first did this first set of photos, I was mortified at that difference between white people and people of colour.
Over 5 times the number of white people to people of
colour. And, if you look at world population, it's probably... Inverse.
Yeah.
You know, and I know we're talking about English, books in English and blah, 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 blah. There's legitimately no excuse for that. That is a racist. And because I'm a product of a racist society, I don't...
Well, you're not actively racist.
I'm not an asshole, but...
Everybody has subconscious racial...
Yeah, and this is the subconscious bias that we all just give into because we don't think about it. And this experiment has been very eye-opening as far as how much of that impacts your life, even if I consider myself to be quite a conscious person, and I thought that I was shopping consciously before I put this quota in and started measuring my TBR, and I was just wrong.
But you have books on your TBR from all over the place. You have books that you got when you bought books in a box from a second-hand guy. Just give me a whole box of books.
Yes.
Right.
Which is an awesome way to buy books if you're a poor student.
Yes. Wow, if you can hear snoring in the background, that's not me.
That's loud.
Jeez.
Snoring puppy.
Jeez, he's very tired.
Yeah.
Anyway, so 84 to 16 became 63 to 37%.
Which is much improved with only 40 books.
Yeah.
With only,
close to 60.
Nearly 60 books. That is a huge improvement. And to be honest, it's been the easiest place to improve. It's been so easy to find authors of colour, because that gives you so much scope as far as where in the world.
Pick a country.
Yeah. And there's so many interesting things to read about if you're not limiting yourself to white people. It's been awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could see that becoming parody by the time you finish that pretty easily.
Yeah, and I do have a plan for once I've finished the 100 to make sure that I continue to be conscious. But I think that if the pool of books that you're pulling from isn't even, or isn't at least a little bit representative, then you've got no hope of reading representatively.
Yeah, exactly. So, let's just say that there is no racist attitudes to you for picking books from your TBR that you want to read, right? Let's assume you have some random system so that you're never going to preference anybody. It's completely random. What is the ratio of white to people of colour you would like to buy?
Well, I mean, I think if you were gonna make it truly representative, I think you'd have to look at like actual and not just split it into white and people of color. You'd have to
make sure you had enough black people, and then split black people with an African American, Caribbean, African. And...
Yeah, like you'd almost have to do it. I mean, by country would be insane, but
and country doesn't work for Africa because of colonialism, basically.
Yeah, and do you do it by population or do you do it by? I mean, like my preference would be almost to be the inverse of how oppressed you are. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to, if it's really hard for you to get a book published in English because colonialism and just that's the history of your specific country, then I want to have, 50 times the amount of those authors.
Yeah.
Than is reasonable than, the Irish author for whom it's comparatively a walk in the park to get published.
But even an Irish author is going to struggle compared to an author based in London or New York.
Yeah, so I think that's a really complicated question. Like, what's the ideal balance? I think white people definitely need to be the minority in representative.
Yeah. I think, like, we get into the minutiae here where we're talking about whether we should read from certain countries more and all of that. But even arguments like you should make sure you read more Scottish authors compared to English authors because the Scottish people have a history of being repressed by the English.
Yeah.
And they're both white, and you can't tell me that a Moldovan author is anywhere near as privileged.
Also, you've got people of colour who are born in England, Scotland.
Yeah.
That.
I mean,
it's. I don't think there's an easy way to classify and quantify this.
I think what we do when we start to judge how privileged or underprivileged somebody is, it becomes problematic in itself, and that
you don't want to be measuring people's oppression.
That's it. As readers, one of the things we should be trying to do is like looking at the most number of views and different.
And I think that's really what
possible.
What I've really tried to do. I've bought a couple of duplicate authors, but I've really tried to expose myself to as many new authors in this project as I can, and I think that's going to be part of my ongoing attitude to reading. There's always going to be authors that you just instantly love, and you.
Yeah, you get to read every book by. You have discovered in this project that you love Octavia Butler. You're going to read her entire back catalogue.
I totally will, but that shouldn't be your instinct anytime you find someone you kind of like. I think. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like the bar for that to buy someone's whole back catalogue.
I mean, when you're reading backlist, I mean, the difference between new releases and backlist is huge. So but when you're reading backlist, when you pick authors, even authors that I quite like, I don't really know if I intend to read
all of them.
All of them, like.
Yeah. See, I've always had I've always liked to collect all of an author and read all of an author and understand their work in the context of its entirety. But I think if you're going to get the most amount of viewpoints, that's about strategy. So
yeah, but if you enjoy the writing of an author, it's
a balance. It's a balance. But I definitely think that I'm going to spend a significant amount of time over the next few years in particular really redressing the balance that is my education and my background and my upbringing, and really exploring authors that are different to me.
Yeah. All right, let's get on to the queer authors then. Now, there is something strange with the queer authors. It's very hard to search.
Hard.
It's very hard. Like, it's really easy when we're just looking behind here for, this is, like Margaret Atwood, you can find out what her sexuality is relatively easy because she's famous.
Yeah, but
but it was quite hard, and a lot of the time, so we may have practiced a little bit of bi erasure here,
because if you're
if you're in a straight relationship, if you're presenting as straight and there's nothing to say that you're not,
then we've assumed that the author is straight, which is shitty, but for the purpose of classifying this, we either had to create a whole new category for her, or...
And I think for the purpose...
And I don't think that encourages me to find queer authors.
I think when you think about it realistically, if somebody is being an advocate for the bisexual community and it's hard to find out that they're bisexual...
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, they need to be visibly queer for it to really count. Because I want a queer perspective. And
yes.
if you're closeted, then I don't know I'm getting a queer perspective. Therefore, I'm not adding it to my little bank of queer perspectives in my brain. So,
yeah,
you're getting counted as straight anyway. Because unfortunately, that's how my brain still defaults. Is that if you don't say you're queer, you're straight.
And then the other thing is
I acknowledge it.
That a lot of people will come out as bi. Nobody is coming out as straight. So
no, and until we get to the point where society has you come out as straight, and or actually, doesn't give a toss about orientation at all.
Most of the authors, I believe, most of the authors that were queer were the easy authors to identify. When the author was straight, that was really difficult because
no one says, "Hey, I'm straight."
Yeah, that's it. So that's why we think.
And if they do, then I'm probably not reading them because they're probably not. They're probably homophobic. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so what were my numbers?
So prior to this, you had 88% straight, 12% queer. Oh, sorry. What I was actually saying is you had 3 authors that we just couldn't identify, and there was reasonable doubt.
No, there were 2 authors.
3 books.
3 books. Yes, one of those authors was Octavia Butler, who is often referred to as a lesbian, or asexual or bisexual, when in various discussions about her after her death. But if you trace the source material for that, it's not very reliable, and she wasn't openly queer.
She was never in a relationship that we know about?
It does sound like she was either incredibly private about her love life, or she may have been asexual. She may have just not ever met anyone. Who knows?
A victim of trauma and just didn't want to deal with that type of people
again.
Or
maybe she just didn't.
Yeah, who knows? Anyway, the other one is Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker is apparently asexual, but it is over 100 years ago that he was alive. He never said he was asexual. Asexual wasn't a thing when Bram Stoker was out there. And it's such a hard thing to prove.
Or disprove.
Disprove. He did have a wife who apparently he never slept with. And how do you, like, that is...
Yeah.
Anyway, so reasonable doubt on 2 authors that we just...
didn't classify.
And probably they're both asexual is the most likely thing, because...
Yeah, and there's absolutely 0 ace representation otherwise in my...
Yeah,
TBR.
and it's, I mean, it must be one of the hardest things. It's one of the newest categories to the spectrum. Anyway, so you've gone from 88% straight to only down to 81% straight.
I have, like...
But you have more than doubled
the number of queer books that I own.
Yeah.
And I think if we did the stats of my reading, once I'd started this, my reading is much more queer than it was before this project started.
Yeah.
So while that's a miserable percentage still, And I'm definitely going to be looking for some intersectional purchases for my last 42 books in this project. I'm not too disappointed that needle hasn't moved much.
I think because your person of colour needle has moved so much that you could probably say that you've bought a lot of straight people of colour. And then that's...
I definitely think that's happened.
That's counteracted all of the queer authors. I mean, but it hasn't. You have actually made a difference here.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a long time before you get that towards 50-50. And is 50-50 the aim? Because
I don't know if queer to straight representation needs to be 50-50. I don't even know if that's possible. I would be really interested to know, like, how many queer books are out there.
I would actually, we follow a few queer booktubers. I would love to know if they know how many queer books they read.
And I'm not... Often when people talk about queer literature, they talk about, like, queer characters and queer representation. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm not counting books that have queer characters but are written by straight people. I'm only talking about the authors for this task. And I think maybe part of the problem might be that it's the same, like I need to buy multiples of authors rather than, or I need more tools for research.
Yeah, I think, like, one of the problems you clearly had was that it was much easier to determine somebody's colour than it was their sexuality.
Heaps easier, heaps quicker, as far as, like, a time-consuming shopping process. Googling every author that I am interested in and checking their sexuality is not a smart way to shop. And I did literally go and find lists of queer authors and look for books on those lists that interested me, in order to expand my queer library. And I went to a queer bookshop. Those were my sort of tactics.
I think you should probably go back to the queer
bookshop.
Maybe look for people of colour in the queer bookshop to get your intersectional numbers up.
Yeah.
So, do you think this has been successful? Are you going to change your tactic? Are you going to focus on getting more queer authors in because that hasn't been as successful as people of colour? Or are you going to keep hitting people of colour because you can fix that completely and then focus on queer people?
I think I'm going to focus on queer people and try and make them queer people of colour where I can. I'm conscious that while there's 42 books left to haul, I'm conscious that I've probably got 10 on their way here, so I've probably only got another 30 choices to make a difference.
Yeah.
Before this project is over. I'm really happy that as a first kick in the ass, this sort of buy up that I've done, which has hugely increased the size of my TBR, which is another whole story. I'm really happy that it has really shifted the tone of my TBR and my reading. But I do think I'll have to be particularly around queer authors, making sure that anytime I do buy a book, it's at least 1-for-1. Representative, not representative. At least. But I don't think it'll be that. I think the rule will be you can have one white person, one queer person, and one person of colour. And it has to be in that ratio. Maybe.
Okay. Now, the other thing that you've not prepared for, but I'm going to spring this on you. When you posted your first video, somebody said that you should be looking for women in translation. And even, I think you should be looking for people of colour in translation and queer people in translation as well.
Look, I think that this is a huge rabbit hole. The other category that I have completely not addressed at all and will be something that I would like to address after this 100 is people of differing abilities, because I'm not even comfortable with the language around disabled people because I'm so unexposed. I have a little bit of exposure to the deaf community, but other than that, I have no and a small amount of exposure to neurodiverse people. But that's personal relationships rather than necessarily any knowledge of the community as a whole and activism and that sort of thing.
Well,
that's definitely a section that is just a gaping hole in my TBR.
So once you get these big categories fixed
up, so like,
you've got more...
like this is never going to be fixed. Is going to have to be something that I'm conscious of throughout my reading life, and I think that's one of the lessons you have to take away. Is if representation in your reading is important to you, then you have to be aware of every book you buy.
Yeah.
Especially if you're coming up to Christmas. I mean, I'll probably get vouchers, but there will be people who buy us books that do not fit into any of these categories, and that will be my white people for the year. You know what I mean? Like, you can't really do much about that, but if you want balance, you have to counteract it.
Yeah.
It's a big process, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're done,
I think that's our update, and we'll check in again when I've done my 100, and I'll by then have a legit plan on how I'm going to keep it improving as I go on. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let us know how you manage to read diversely. What is your tactic? Do you try and...
Or do you not care? Is this something that is just a dumb project and not something that's important to you? Like, I'd be interested to hear about that too, because I think this is a big deal. I think it's important.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that people disagree.
Well, I hope not.
I don't think you necessarily have to be coming from an overtly racist or homophobic standpoint to disagree about that. You might just only like to read fantasy. And
it's hard to...
And it's not your aim to experience people's perspectives when you read. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that there are legitimate... people whose reading reasons are different to ours.
If you read a specific genre, you might not. Anyway, this is going back into the discussion.
Anyway!
Let us know how you keep reading diverse. Like, comment, subscribe, all of the things. Bye.